When printing a cyanotype from a negative, there are just so many variables and so many different ways to approach it that it's almost impossible to be really scientific about it, but let's try to be somewhat anyway. This case, this is a negative that I've made. I always want to be sure that the emulsion side, or the side where the ink went down, is up. That should be up. And in this case, what I'll do is just put my solar printed substrate in between the negative and this backing, and then use bulldog clips to clip it down. That's one way. In this case, I've made a negative of a drawing that I've done, and it's also emulsion side up, but I'm going to, rather than bulldog clip it, I'm going to put a piece of glass on top of it. So I'll put that substrate in there in a moment. And the same process for this next one right here, that seed pod from a poppy. In this instance here, I'm actually taking two negatives hooked together, tried to line them up as best I could. And the reason I'm doing that is because some of the variables that you'll find are that your negative could be more or less dense. So for instance, in this one, wherever it's black, I want it to be super opaque, and with just one negative I wasn't getting that. I could see through it. So with two of them hooked together, I should be able to alter that and get a different print than the first time I did it with just one. So it's there, you know, as to science, that might be just a way to test another technique. Again, emulsion side up, but in this case, because I'm going to put it in this glass frame, I'll need to be able to flip it over. And I'll put this backing on it, adhere it, and then flip it over. And then finally, in this case, another drawing. And it was not super opaque, but black enough, I think. And we'll find out. We'll test it. We'll see the difference between these two techniques. One with a negative doubled up, or one that's just the straight negative with as much black as I could get. All right, so I need to go inside and grab my substrates, the ones that I've treated, different medium that I'll use, either paper or fabric, and bring them out and get them all set up. I always feel a certain amount of pressure when I start this process, because these treated sheets will start to develop as quickly as I get them in the sun. So I brought them out in a box so that they're somewhat shaded from the light, and they're also inside of a black plastic garbage bag. So I'm going to just kind of reach in and randomly pull out whatever I get, and that's what we'll be putting it on. In this case, it's a piece of paper. So we'll just set this on there. Let's see how that works. And then bulldog clip it on. See how this goes. Emulsion side up. And we'll clip it. Maybe. I don't quite have the strength. There we go. And then that one can start to develop. Again, there's a certain amount of science to this, and so we need to kind of keep track of the timing. Anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes, maybe even 30, depending on the paper and a number of different factors. Okay, let's see what we pull out next for this rabbit. Probably would have been good to get it untangled first. Okay, this is a piece of fabric that we're going to work with in this case, and the glass will weight it down enough so that even though it's wrinkled, it'll probably be just fine. Let's see. Don't remember which side it was painted on, but I don't think it really matters. And is this up, right side up? It is. And the glass will weight it down. Let's move this one out of the way. So we'll set that one like that. And so it has started to develop. And now we'll move down to the next one. Again, it'll be weighted with glass. And this time, let's see what we pull out. This is a sheet of watercolor paper, which is perfect because I can color on it with pencils or something later. So again, emulsion side up, place it on the paper, and then we'll count on that glass weighting it down, making good contact. Okay, well, we put this one on another one on a piece of fabric again this time, and I see that it got bent down a little bit in one corner. It's not landed exactly perfect, but I do want to test how double exposure works, a double or 2 layers of negative. All right, so for this last one, I've just grabbed a couple little pieces of natural material. We'll lay them all on the glass. Something like that, and then lay this down on top of that, and then flip the whole thing over. Let's put another piece of cardboard in there. Make sure there's enough points of contact that those materials will stay put when we flip this over. And then we'll set timers and see how we go on the different exposure times. So that one it didn't land quite how I had hoped, but it'll still be beautiful, I'm sure. All right, so starting with 5 minutes and working our way to 30, we'll time these at varying degrees. We'll use one primarily as a test, perhaps the one with the natural material, and lay a piece of cardboard over to mask it at varying times, just so that we can see what happens at 5 minutes, what 10 minutes, 20, etc. Make a test strip, more or less. All right, let's let these things expose to the sun. Okay, this one's been out here for more like 10 minutes, so we'll take it in and develop it. The others can wait for another 5 minutes accordingly, 5, maybe 10, and then 15. There are a couple different ways you can test the exposure times. One of them is to simply put a piece of cardboard over the area and then at varying times. So for instance, right now I just put it on at 10 minutes, and then I'll move it up and at 15 and then up a little bit more, and we'll just see how different the exposure is from one to the next. Another way it would be to actually make a test strip, which I'll demonstrate in a little bit. I think it's time to take in the second, or put into water, the second of the 2 images that was on watercolor paper. We can do this one with a hose and cold water right here outside. So I just have an ordinary garden hose and then a little photographic processing tray that I got. And so now I'm just going to take the glass off of this image and the negative off. One of the things you need to be careful of is when you have this image on here with the negative side up, not emulsion, but where the ink went down, that can be sometimes washed off if you're not careful. So get it far away from the water if you plan to use it again. And then we'll just take this piece of paper that we want to develop now and put it in the water and start rinsing it. And I'd say this one has a better result so far, but you never know until you really complete the whole process. Yeah, this one's looking really good. So we'll just keep rinsing it until it runs clear, and it's not going to run clear, of course, in this situation. If we were in a sink, we could have running water over it, and we could use a hose as well. It's best to use the better watercolor paper that you can, because you can see you're in and out of water a lot. If it's less quality paper, it could degrade after all this washing. And sometimes you even do processes that happen on top of this, so it's in water again. So good to have it so that you can get it so that it withstands a lot of water. I think this one's just about ready to be, it's just about rinsed. The timing is different from one chemical, one substrate, every instance is a little different. And that's another thing you can experiment with, how long you've rinsed it, and see how much different one is to the next, from how much water and how much rinsing you did. So I think we're good here, and I can go take this one inside and hang it up to dry, and we'll look at it in 24 hours. Sometimes part of the cyanotype process is just the experimentation, and in this case, part of what I'm trying to find out is how long a piece of substrate that's been treated with the chemicals is actually viable. These pieces that I have kept in a dark bag so that they are outside of UV rays seem to be a little bit dark, and maybe they're beyond their usefulness time. So as a test, I've got several frames all set up here with negatives that I've made. So I've placed the negatives emulsion side up, or it looks like they're upside down right now. It looks like I just placed it down, but when I flip the frame over, the emulsion side will be up. Then the next layer will be the sort of past its date substrate, and then I'll adhere the whole thing with a backing and flip them over. As you can see, this camera setup creates shadows, so I'll have to turn the camera off once they're being exposed and move the frame here away. So let's get these put on. I'm just going to grab random pieces here. No idea whether they'll even work. This one even has holes in it, so it may only expose a portion of the negative image that I created. So here's with the backing on there. We're going to get it on there nice and tight, and then flip the whole thing over like so. And so you can see already it's only going to hit certain parts of that piece of paper. So I'll set this over once it's really tightly put in there and move the camera out of the way. The next one is another piece of pre-treated substrate that I had actually taped off for some reason. Oh, it's actually fabric. So let's try that one and put its backing on. Nice and tight. Now my little tabs are starting to fatigue off, and so they're soon or later not going to work anymore. They'll just completely pop right off. But for now, I can get them on there. A screwdriver would be a great tool for getting them down there and holding them tight. So that one is ready. It's only going to hit parts of the fabric. And then finally this image, this rabbit. And I'll put that one in on this piece of paper. Also not going to hit the whole image, but again, these are just scraps of pre-treated, and I'm just doing a little test here. Now the next question is, how long? So I am finding that longer is not necessarily better, so we'll just try different time frames. The way these little tabs are harder and harder to get to use to work. Anyway, so we'll flip this over. As you can see, it's going to only hit a portion of that piece of substrate. We'll get these all cooking, and I will check back in a little bit. We'll go maybe 5, 10, and 15 minutes. All right, I've laid out two more. These are little silk discs that I've put some different floral and botanical materials on. I always try to find things that are very delicate, lacy. There's more area negative space than there is solid area. That usually works best. So these again are experimental in that they've been sitting for some time, so we'll see how well they work. The other image that we started this one has now been out here for quite some time, probably at least 5 minutes, almost 10, and I'm going to go ahead and go develop this one. The other two are still working on being exposed. Well, after washing this, rinsing this, it's always exceptionally difficult to see right out the gate whether it's worked or not. It takes a while before it actually fully develops. You can accelerate that, but in this case, since it's just a piece of scrap watercolor paper and it was experimental, I probably won't hasten the process. This was probably left closer to 10 minutes than 5, but there is some definition in the petals, and so that's certainly an interesting outcome. We'll look at the others in just a bit. In the case of this photogram, I'm checking to see if very little time is any better than a whole lot of time. So I'm now pulling off, because it was beginning to create a little bit of condensation on there, pulling off the live material. And I'm going to run inside and rinse this, but I'm thinking that little time is going to be is more effective. So I'll rinse it and bring back the results. Okay, so I have a question for you. And I don't mean to sound terribly philosophic about this, but we've been talking about the cyanotype process being experimental. So when you look at these, do you see abject failure and utter ruin, or do you see a possibility of some experimentation beyond where we started and some learning in the process, and maybe even some potential? I have to say, when I look at them, I see that, and that's because there's something in me that won't let me just let this go. I want to save this, or I want to see what would happen if I played with this, because they're overexposed and too dark. That doesn't mean that we're done. There's other things that might happen. So we're going to do a little bit of experimenting here. So welcome to my lab in my kitchen. We are about to create a water bath, a bleach, and then a toning bath. And so we'll talk about each of those steps in just a moment. All right, so I have here 3 trays, different colors that are not significant in any way other than from the left to the right. We're going to have a bleach bath here, 2 different kinds. We'll start with soda ash and then move to ammonia. And then here we have clear water, and soon in this one we will have the toner, which in this case will be green tea. It's currently steeping. It has about a minute to go, and we'll put that in there in just a bit. But starting with a rinse bath, because you have to at least get the paper you're going to work on or the substrate wet before you start to bleach. So this one is so dark, I can't really see what was on there, what it was I was trying. So we're going to try and bleach that and then tone it and see if we can salvage this. So this is just in clear water. We're going to let it set, and I'm going to go get that tea. This is now 7 bags of green tea that I steeped for 10 minutes in half a liter of water. And then I added another quarter, and probably will add yet another quarter, so a full liter of water all total, but cool water to cool that down, because we can't have it be boiling. So let me get more. And we have this one that's just the clear rinse water, and we're still rinsing this. It's good and wet now, but then we can put it into our bleach bath somewhat wet. We don't want to go directly in there dry. So let me now mix in soda ash. Now I realize that you probably don't have this. I only have it because I dye fiber, and it's used as a mordant. And that's essentially what we're doing here. So I'm going to add 2 teaspoons, that will be plenty, into that bottle of water. And in so doing, we will create a bleach bath. Now I have to do some reconfiguration here. Okay, so I'm going to put 2 teaspoons of soda ash in this container, and I want to stir it and continue to stir it until it's completely dissolved. If I don't get it completely dissolved, there will be little speckles in my image, and I don't want that. So we'll take a little bit, and it's going to make a lot of crunchy noises, so I'm going to spare you that and come back in the next segment with all my preparations complete. All right, my soda ash is completely now dissolved. I see a funny little reflection in there, and we'll hopefully take care of that in a minute. This soda ash is readily available in a number of different places, but I get mine from Dharma Trading. That's my source for my fiber dyes. And I have a massive bag here because I use it so often. It's used as a mordant. And that's essentially what we're doing here. We're going to be breaking down or reducing the iron in our image. And then that way the tannin from the tea will have a chance to bond. It actually is the same thing that happens when you're dyeing fiber. It makes it more absorbent or more readily able to take up that tannin. So now this is good and wet. So the time you put this in the bleach for varies greatly from one image to the next, one substrate to the next, but usually, a couple seconds to maybe a couple minutes. And I can already see some things happening. It's starting to shift a little bit to sort of a lighter violet. And you can see the bunny rabbit that I drew once upon a time is on there. It's starting to really come more visible. So we might be able to save this yet. I was concerned. You have to know when enough is enough and just grab it and get it out of there. And I haven't experimented with this much, so that I don't know on watercolor paper how it's going to work. I've done it more with fiber, like I said. But I think we're there. We don't want to take out all the contrast. And then once you're satisfied with the bleaching, you can take it back into the rinse water. And we'll let it rinse, and you can see that now there's a lot more definition. Where I thought I had nothing but a big dark blue background, now I have bunny rabbit. So then you generally want to take it to where it gets just a little bit more yellow. So I may have aborted this a little soon, but let's rinse it. We can always take it back in there. I think this might be all right though. And then we'll take it into the tannin. We can start to tone it. And the toning will be different from substrate to substrate, from the amount of density of your image from one to the next, and also even just the type of toner. This case, the green tea has a lot of tannin in it. Black tea does. They come up with different colors. Some people use coffee. I don't drink coffee or tea, so I don't have a lot of these things around, but either of those work. People use everything from that to wine. So I think this is rinsed well enough. I'm going to go ahead now. I think I will go back and see if I can lighten this area a little bit. I don't want to lighten this anymore, so maybe I can put it in just partially like this. And we'll let that just remove just a little bit more of the cyan color. I think we're just about there. I'm going to do it without removing the detail in his face. And then we'll go back in here into the rinse water and once again just agitate it a little, and I think we're there now. I think we're good. So once this is completely rinsed, we'll go ahead and go into the tea. And that you can leave in for either a minute or two, but I've read where some leave it in there for up to 24 hours, which I think is more than what we need to do. But you can see already it's starting to tone it. We're going to leave that one sit and start rinsing another. So how about we try this one now? We'll get it good and wet. I'm just getting water everywhere. My kitchen laboratory is going to be, it's going to need a mop up when I'm done here. And these pieces of paper are just a little bit big for my trays. Typically you would use something smaller. I'm going to have to go get a towel, it looks like, if I don't stop slopping here. Now we're going to go back into the soda ash on one or two of these, and then we'll switch over to a different bleach. But we're going to be able to see soon here what happens. Now, I don't want to tone this one too much because I'll get it too dark and I'll lose my definition again. But you can see it's changed the color, it's changed the result, and I'm happy with that. I'm going to go ahead now and put this over into the bleach so that it can start bleaching, and I'm going to rinse this one out. And then I am going to change my rinse water because I've gotten a couple different things in there by now. So this is in the bleach and it's starting to do its thing. I'm going to want to remove that fairly quickly, but let me go change this rinse water. And we can see on this one now quite a bit more definition. I'm much happier with it, and I may not want to do anything in terms of toning this one. I may leave it and call this good. I'm actually quite happy with it just as it is. So I'll rinse this to stop the action of the bleach, and we'll stop. We don't need to tone this, I don't think. We could, but I'm quite happy with the way that worked out, and so we saved something. And now I'm happy that I didn't just throw that away. So we'll go ahead and move this over to the sink where I can rinse it better and clean up this mess and go on to the next bleaching agent. Before I switch over to the other bleaching agent, I thought I would try a couple that were fiber. This was a silk disc and it was quite dark, and I've bleached it now. I'm going to go ahead and put that one in the toner, in the tannin, in the tea, the toner, yes, and let it do its thing. And then this one is just now rinsed. Let's put it in the bleach and see what we end up with. I'm not certain this is going to work, but it's an experiment and we might end up with good results. Let that bleach for a little bit, and then we'll keep moving this around and checking it periodically to see what's happening. So far I don't see a lot of change, but we shall see. It's silk, so it's going to react differently, obviously. And this one is starting to appear. This was a fan that I put on as a photogram on a piece of pre-toned fabric. We've talked about this in a couple other segments that I have had around for quite some time. well over a year. Possibly the bag was open a little bit, so it was exposing over time. So theoretically, it shouldn't have done anything, and I've gotten a few mildly successful results. And in this case, I think it's going to work. It's starting to bleach out, and the image is about to appear, so I may have saved this one yet. So this is why we do these experimental processes, because you never know what you might end up with. And it doesn't stop here. Once you've done something like this, where you've toned it, you may want to go back in and paint over the top of it. There's just no end to possibilities. And so don't limit yourself. If you think you've failed, it's very likely you really haven't. So I think that's probably bleached out enough now. Let's kind of squeeze that out and move it over to the rinse again. And I'm not certain that I'm going to tone this with the tea or not, so we'll think about that a little bit more. I do have one more that I'd like to try and bleach, but I have to get it wet first. This is another one of these old pieces of it's probably overexposed or previously exposed accidentally, pieces of pre-treated fabric. So we'll get it good and wet before putting it in the toner. I don't actually remember what it was I put on here, but we're about to find out. Oh, I do too. It is a piece of lace that I used on this one, and so I'm hoping that it works. Now let's see what we've got here. This turned quite green. That's interesting. It's kind of pretty. Let's pull this one out, and we'll just let that one, we'll rinse it and see how that turns out. It started to tone the white. So here's this delicate balance. You've bleached something. You've got to be careful you don't bleach it too much. And then when you retone it, you may obliterate the white that you created by rinsing or bleaching. So I'm going to move this over to the rinse in the sink. I can show you more readily what the difference is. This was bleached only, and you see how I re-established all those whites and got my contrast back. And then I toned it. While it shifted it to a different color, it did in fact darken the areas that I had lightened. Now this one's gotten quite light, and I think it's going to work. And I think I will move this one over because it's not as successful. I will move it over into the tannin, the tea, the toner, and see what we get. Now see, that's quite turquoise, which is not something I expected. And now it's going very green. That's going to be interesting. So let's, before this bleaches out too much, move it over, and I may just leave it as it is. We'll rinse this one, and then we will go to the other bleaching agent so that you can see what the difference is from one to the next. Now see, I'm probably going to be okay with this one being just like this, and I'm going to pull this one out of the tea now because I can see that as it darkens or tones, it also goes back to not being able to be very visible what that pattern is. So I'll go rinse this out in a clean water, and then we'll figure out what to do with this. Now, it is possible to go directly into the tannin without, or the tea or the toner, without this process, the bleach. No matter what you do, you always want to wet it first, rinse it first before you go into that. So I think I'm going to leave this one be. It's interesting to me, these new colors that it's created, and there's somewhat of a pattern in it. It's still only mildly successful in my mind, but it doesn't mean we're done yet. So let's go in the next segment with a different bleach. All right, so I've refreshed my rinse water, and I'm still using the same tea for my toner, but now I'm going to mix up a different bleach, and I want to make sure I'm really clear about this. I'm speaking of bleach, but not the bleach that like Clorox that you buy at the store, especially when you use this. This is ammonia. You'd never want to mix bleach and ammonia. That would be bad. So bleaching is being used in a different way than we're used to. It's meant to remove some color, not bleach like Clorox. So there's 2 teaspoons. I'm going to put 7 total teaspoons of ammonia in this half of a liter of water. And it smells quite strong of ammonia now. And then I'm going to start by rinsing again something. I've got a piece of fabric here. Let's start with that. Way dark. Can't tell what's on there. I kind of know what it is. I believe it's a bunny. And, if you're sensitive to smell, that ammonia, you might want to have to do it outside. It's really strong. But it'll be all right. So now this is rinsed. I'm going to go in the bleach. Realize that this is a different bleach, so it's going to act differently. And so you may have to pull it quicker, or you might have to leave it sit longer. So we'll just see what happens here. Just kind of agitating it in that ammonia, and it's not happening that fast. It looks to me as though maybe the soda ash happens faster. So we'll let that sit while we also soak another print. This one's on watercolor paper, and it was totally experimental. You can see I did it on something where I'd cut the square out or a rectangle out of the middle of it. So I wasn't expecting any particularly outstanding results to begin with, or I wouldn't have used this piece of paper. I was just testing something. And so we'll get this one good and wet. And I'm really getting the sink and the kitchen counter wet as well. Now, this ammonia one is taking a lot longer than the others have, and it could be because of the incredible concentration of color that was in it to begin with. And it might just be that that's the way with ammonia. It is all of a sudden starting to activate, and that's what I've noticed about these different bleaches, and there are others we can talk about later. But they will not seem like they're working, and then all of a sudden they're working, and they're really working, and they happen fast. So you kind of need to watch them. This one's getting there. And we'll go straight to the toner with this one in just a moment. But I might only put it in the toner briefly because I don't want to lose any of the lightning effect that I've had that's happened here. It's very difficult, as always, to tell how far we've gone or need to go. All right, I think that we've got it. I can see where the areas that are from the negative, where the line work is, have shifted to that color of yellow that I was looking for. So I think I'm going to go ahead and swap these two and rinse this one in bleach and put this one over here to rinse out. And let's see what we get over here. Now this one's shifting in a completely different way. It's almost immediately reacting and going towards the purple tones. So this one's working very differently than this one. Might be just by virtue of the fiber. This is cotton fabric and that is paper. So we'll see here. Rinse this one. I'm not loving the way this has reacted, and I may want to just stop the whole process here on this one and go to the soda ash because it's a little more reliable for me because that's one I use often. And then we'll go ahead and concentrate on this, which it's developing quite quickly or undeveloping quite quickly, and I do want to stop that so that it can be toned. So let's move this one over now. Stop that bleach action. But see, that would be a successful print on its own. I wouldn't necessarily tone this, but because it's so experimental, it has that cut out in the middle and everything else, I am going to go ahead and put it in the tea just to see what we get. So now it's been pretty well rinsed, and we'll shift it over and we'll bring over another piece of paper to work on while this one tones, and we'll see how this goes. Now it's going to react pretty quickly, I can see already. I'm splashing tea everywhere. So we'll go ahead and let that work, and then let's work on this piece of paper. I have no idea what's on this one either. It's just dark. Oh, it's the same thing as this. So with any luck at all, we may just go ahead and bleach this one and leave it, call it good. And then I have one more to experiment with. But in the meantime, while we're doing these different processes, let's talk a little bit about some other things you can use. For your bleaching, for instance, you can use washing powders, the old-fashioned kind. And then as far as toners, coffee, tea, just be sure there's something that's got a lot of tannin in it. So really dark coffee or really black tea, green tea. This is good and wet now. Let's see what happens if we go into the ammonia bleach with this one and then just stop it, not necessarily tone it, because I think we will, I think I'm going to be happy with just regaining what that negative was like before I overexposed it. So this one we'll just let sit. It's not reacting quite as quickly. See, these are different papers. This is handmade paper. That was a Arches watercolor. So let's see how this one's looking. It's interesting with the toning. You know, I might leave it in there much longer, but I'm kind of interested in the way that's turned out. So I'm going to go ahead and rinse it, and then we'll keep working on this one. I'm going to turn it over and see if we can get it to penetrate more. And there was an awful lot of exposure on this, so it was completely black. Remember, I couldn't even tell what was on this one. But this is handmade, so there's a lot of cotton in it. Now that is finally starting to have the bleaching agent work. Now there's some flaws in it where something has spilt. So it's never really going to make me so happy, but I would like to try painting on this with some gouache afterwards, so I may not tint it. I find this quite interesting, the way that this turned. They all turn a little different, but this is more what I would have expected, this sort of a almost violet tone. That's usually what this tea will do. So I'll go ahead and I'll refresh my rinse water. I'm going to let this one sit and bleach for just a wee bit longer, and then I have one more to work on. Well, I actually find this one quite interesting as it is, so I'm not going to do much more to that. I'll rinse it in the fresh rinse water, and then we have one more here to do. This is another piece on cloth, and it was already sort of visible. You can almost tell what it was. I mean, at least there's some definition, but let's go ahead and start getting that one wet and ready to, boy, it's not absorbing water very well. It's beating up. That's interesting. I don't know what that fabric was, but it's really interesting how the water is not saturating. And this one I'll rinse a little bit more, but I think I'll just leave it. I'm not gonna. All right, I think this has gotten enough saturation that we can go right into the ammonia and bleach that one. And we'll let that sit for a little bit, and I'll come back in another segment and we'll look at how this works out and whether to tone it or not. All right, I switched over from the bleaching agent. This has been bleached. You don't necessarily need bleach when you use borax as your toner. You can generally just go straight there, but that was so dark I felt like I needed to bleach it. And I've mixed in a couple teaspoons of borax, just plain old 20 mule team borax. And we shall see what happens here. I want to make sure it's all dissolved. This is a total experiment. I have no idea what's going to happen, except I've heard it turns a beautiful violet in some cases. So let's just see what we get. Now, I don't know if I have enough of it in there or not, but let's see. This is one of the most experimental things you can use as a toner, this borax. Unpredictable would be the best way to describe it. And I'm not seeing a lot of reaction yet, but I might not have had enough in there. So I'm going to go into a rinse, and then we'll add a little bit more borax. And so I'll do that off camera so you don't have to watch the slow process of dissolve. All right, so there's a couple more teaspoons of borax in here now. Let's see if it does its magic any quicker. Yeah, now it's starting to go more violet-ish. So I think probably within a short period of time here, we're going to have a new look to this. Yeah, it's tinting it, definitely tinting it more towards the blues and purples. Interesting. So as you can see, there's just a lot of different things you can do to save something you think may have been ruined, either overexposed or just didn't turn out how you expected. Don't stop, just keep playing. And I will be sure to share any of the other experiments that I do over the next days so that you can get some more ideas and inspiration to go play with your cyanotypes. All right, thanks.